Welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of A Story Club, Global Cultures. This is a unique venture. It's streaming simultaneously from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, from Dehra Dun in India, and San Francisco in the United States. We speak with people from around the world, trying to understand different cultures, their uniqueness, their problems and their issues, and how we can all learn and work together while remaining grounded in our distinctive cultural matrices. Today, my distinguished guests are Professor Kapil Kumar from India. Is it New Delhi?
New Delhi.
Right. And Rajiv Malhotra from the United States. Are you joining us from Princeton?
Yes.
Welcome, welcome. Let me just set up with a little introduction, and then we'll get into the discussion, if that's okay with you. Today, the West embraces yoga and meditation. Indian CEOs are plentiful in leading multinational corporations. Indian immigrants play a large part in the daily life of countries around the world, and Indian music, movies, food, and culture are increasingly embraced. Now, East, West, and South Asia have long been influenced by and interacted with Hinduism, Buddhism, and Indian civilization from ancient times up to the present. But at the same time as all of this is happening, people in the West in particular have misunderstood and sometimes deliberately distorted key aspects of Indian society, including caste, nationalism, Hindu fundamentalism, paganism, polytheism, or idol worship, as they call it, the Kashmir issue, and relationships with other religions and peoples, including Muslims. Now, what are some of the most important misunderstandings and distortions of these issues in the Western media, academia, and foreign policy making? I should also add other parts of Asia also have these misunderstandings and distortions. Why do these misunderstandings exist? How can they be dispelled? My two guests today have spent their notable careers addressing such issues with great energy and determination. And so I look forward to a lively and enlightening discussion. So gentlemen, welcome again.
Thank you.
So let's start off. For those of us in our audience that don't know, can you tell us a bit about your background and what you do, particularly as it relates to helping the rest of the world understand India better? Let's start off with Rajiv Malhotra and then Professor Kapil Kumar. Rajiv?
Well, first of all, Kirk, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for putting this together. It's an important topic, and no amount of discussions is enough because I've been doing this for 25 years. So my original career as a physicist, as a computer scientist, then as a businessman, as a corporate executive, and then owning my own companies in technology, I concluded around 1994 and started Infinity Foundation. I had a change of heart, a change of conscience, and some spiritual experiences. So I decided to give up the world of making money, profit, careers, and all that, and started my foundation, Infinity Foundation, full time. That is what I have done for over 25 years, full time. It's not a hobby. It's not something on weekends. It's not something on the side. So I dived right into it, with my body, mind, everything I got into it. And so at the infinityfoundation.com website, people can get a whole lot of information. Also, our YouTube channel, Rajiv Malhotra.official, and Facebook channel, Rajiv Malhotra.official, and Twitter, at Rajiv Message, will give you a whole lot of information. But talking about today's issue, I have spent a whole lot of time understanding what is the root cause, what is the ecosystem that generates bias. I started at the fruits of the tree, and if the fruit is poisoned, you got to find out what is happening in the roots. The roots produce the fruit. So we can criticize one episode at a time, but we won't solve the problem unless we go to the root cause. And the root cause is the whole ecosystem, and maybe I hope we'll get into discussing what the ecosystem is, which is producing all these biases. And when did it start? What's the historical origin of this ecosystem of phobia against Hindu Dharma, against India, the Breaking India forces, all of that? Because once a person understands the deep roots and framework in which all this is happening, then you can make sense of why this episode, why are they saying that Indians are hating blacks because of caste and all that kind of nonsense. To understand that, you need to understand the roots, and we can get into that. But thank you for having.
Excellent. That's exactly what we look forward to getting into. And Professor Kumar, if you can just enlighten our audience on your background and work you've been doing.
Thanks, Kev, for being with you again. I think this is the third time, and I really enjoy it. Well, I am a historian. After 44 years of teaching, research, everything in the field of history, I retired last year from Indira Gandhi National University, which is the largest university in the world, as director of Center for Freedom Struggle and Diaspora Studies, and also chairman of the history faculty. And now at the moment, you see, recently, last year, I had built 5 museums, 4 in the Red Fort on 1857, Jallianwala Bagh, INA and Netaji and Azadi Ke Diwane. That's the revolutionary freedom fighters. And then I did 2 museums as a chief historian, again in Calcutta, icons of nationalism from the soil of Bengal, and very recently finished the Jallianwala Bagh Museum in Amritsar as chief historian. And I have done now the scripting and everything for the sound and light shows in Red Fort and also in Jallianwala Bagh. And at the moment, I'm involved in the Prime Minister's Museum, which is coming up, doing it for 5 prime ministers. And plus, I have almost launched a trust now, Sushri, which I call Society for it's called Society for Unearthing Suppressed Historical Realities of India.
Right.
Society for Unearthing Suppressed Historical Realities of India, which is very much in that framework for which you are having this workshop, this dialogue today, that why Indian history was suppressed, and what we can do our best to bring back the historical realities. Because I have always believed that history is a subject which these people can ideologically distort it. They can suppress the facts, but history never dies. And today history is speaking once again, and it's speaking loudly for India in that sense. So that's what I'm up to these days. And then spending my time in Kerala, enjoying on the Twitter, taking history to the younger generation, because I personally feel that history should not be confined in libraries or in seminars or in journals or in books. History belongs to the people, and it should go to the people. So our younger generation have been deprived for a long time from the real historical facts of India, which we are trying to bring to the younger generation for their knowledge and for developing better citizens and nationalists in India over here. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, both of you are involved in some amazing work. I'm familiar with both of your stuff, and it's not just superficial.
Well, diaspora, I've been working on indenture history and all that. And it is also a part of this,
Exactly.
unearthing the suppressed realities.
Exactly. In fact, we have a conference tomorrow celebrating the 100th anniversary of the end of indenture, and I'm presenting a paper where I'm putting it in a wide historical context of India in the world and how we fit into the whole East India Company.
Well, that's great, but I hope that the colonial apologists don't dominate that. Not only that is what's happening on the diaspora conferences.
That's right.
That the same old dialogue of colonialism, that persists, which needs to be challenged there.
Right. So as I said, both of you have been doing, amazing work that's far from superficial, very, very, very deep analyses. And obviously, it's a lifetime of work. In this episode, we won't be able to discuss all of it, unfortunately. But let me start with Rajiv Malhotra again. I'd like you to say, you described the ecosystem. We can describe the ecosystem, but let's maybe start off from a fruit and work down, from a rotten fruit and work down to the root, let's say. So maybe what in your view might be the most important misunderstanding about India right now? And why is it important for the error to be cleared up what are the problems that arise because of it, and how does this relate to the very root that you've been exploring for
Well,
a while now?
Sure, it's a great question. So this whole very recent conflating Black Lives Matter, the whole racism in America with Indian Hindu caste system and all that is a fruit, a poisonous fruit. It started with what is called the Aryan invasion theory, which was promulgated by people in the 1800s. The Germans had their reason for doing it because they could claim that they are the original Aryans. And this is all nonsense. And the British could claim it, saying that since Europeans came to India to civilize Indians thousands of years ago, they left the job incomplete, and we are there civilizing them. Colonialism is actually Aryan invasion 2.0. That's what the British did. So they all had reasons, even though Germans and British were fighting each other, but they had reasons to come up with this. This created this Aryan Dravidian divide, this theory that North Indians are Aryans and South Indians are Dravidians, and therefore the whole Vedas are Aryan, foreign Aryan Vedas. Sanskrit and Vedas are foreign Aryan. The archaeology of Harappa and the Indus Saraswati civilization is Dravidian. So the software, the mental software is all Aryan, and the physical geographical hardware is all Dravidian, and these are in conflict. And so the foreigners came, the evil Aryans came, and they took over all this Dravidian stuff. They destroyed them, pushed them to the south. And so this is actually a root cause of a lot of problems in Indian history. But this is false. The DNA studies don't prove this. They prove just the opposite. Plus, in the Harappan civilization, there are a lot of Vedic ideas in it. And the Sanskrit texts refer to a geography that has nothing to do with Germany or Central Asia. They talk about huge mountains. They talk about massive rivers. They talk about the ocean. This ocean doesn't even exist in Central Asia. The flora and fauna is all, from the continent, Indian subcontinent. So we know that that is false. But it took root for 100 years. And then gradually, with the Macaulay education, these things were planted into Indian minds. So Indian minds grew up for many generations learning this as their history. And they started accepting it. And colonialism is not something the colonizer believes. It is what the colonized start believing. Colonialism happens when the people start believing about themselves what the dominant culture has told them under pressure. Only when you start believing that their history about us is correct, then you become colonized. Until then, you can keep resisting. So gradually over time, we became colonized. And so this Aryan Dravidian divide is very toxic. Now what happened is another movement was started by the church some 20, 30 years ago, which I have written about in my book, Breaking India. And that is called that's called the Afro-Dalit movement. They started a movement saying that the Dalits of India are actually Africans. So
Right.
they said the Dravidians and the Dalits are Africans, and the Aryans are white people. So the Brahmins and all the upper caste, they are white people, they're Aryans, and all the others, the people who they felt were persecuted over time are African. So this white people enslaving blacks in America became projected onto caste in India.
Yeah.
This became that, okay, we have to liberate the Dalits and the Dravidians because they are blacks, and we have to liberate them from white racism. This has turned into a very toxic fruit. Now, my problem is that the powers to be have done nothing about it. A person like me can do all I want, give everything I have into it, which is what I've done. But the culture ministry hasn't put out a speaking tour or funded some conferences like we have requested them to do. We have requested, they have huge resources. We've said that you should have people like us go on tours of North America and have conferences and so on. They can do a lot in terms of countering this, because it's about Indian culture, and that's what the culture ministry is for. Nor has the education ministry done a whole lot, nor has the foreign affairs ministry in India done a whole lot. So the government, and we can no longer claim that it's a wrong government or whatever kind of government it is, the government has not done its job. The ambassadors and these consul generals, they are not out there taking this on, because some of them are not equipped, they are not educated, they got educated in the Western system, and those who got educated in a native and traditional Indian system are not articulate, they're not good scholars, they don't have confidence, and they've created all these organizations in India which are branch offices of organizations they've created branch offices in USA and North America of all kinds of organizations that are headquartered in India that are supposed to be the protectors of our culture. But the people who are running these, they are more into, like-minded groups and getting themselves awards and getting themselves into the limelight, but they are not doing the hard work. They are not sticking their neck out. They are not taking the risks, and nor are they feeling very confident to do so. So this problem is a very serious problem. It impacts the integrity of India. There are resolutions in various parliaments and being discussed to condemn India for it. It's spoiling our reputation with the minorities in this country. It's creating many, many problems. It is based on false stuff, and our government needs to do more about it.
I think that's excellent. And I have to add to here, coming from the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago, where we've had for almost 2 centuries Indian presence here. And we are fully part and fully one of the creators of this country. And recently we had an election, and Africans and Indians are the 2 largest groups. And the party that is traditionally associated with Africans in the majority won, and there was this backlash against Indians. So people, in power, attacking the people out of power, and then projecting onto Indians that we are racist and that somehow we are the only ones who are racist in the society. Of course, there are people who do have racist attitudes, and I'm not denying that, but it happens all throughout the society, and it's projected as part of the caste system. What I like to tell people is that, first of all, the caste system is misunderstood, and all the things you've mentioned. But to add on to that, every society has class, including our own society. If you see a name like Durvertai or Fernandez, you know what level of wealth they have, who they're going to marry, etc. And we have these systems here. And in India, in Trinidad, Hindus never owned slaves. We never had plantations. We weren't part of that. There were even colored slave owners in the Caribbean, but not, and with colored, we mean Afro-European mixed, or sometimes African slave owners. Also, not only did we never own slaves in Trinidad and Tobago or the Caribbean, we were never slave owner oppressors. In India, there's no history of slavery, of buying and selling people in slave markets. There's no part of that in India, in history, in the millennia of existence. And also, right up to the 19th century, the Ethiopian slaves brought by the Muslims into India eventually became free and were ruling small kingdoms outside of Africa, and even within Africa. That wasn't happening anywhere else. This projection of racism onto India is a terrible distortion that has all the very problems you mentioned. And within the Caribbean, where overall Indians and Hindus are a minority, it's a very, very dangerous thing, given some of the history, especially in a place like Guyana, which has the worst racial tensions, but they exist throughout the area. So this whole distortion of caste, it resonates with us very much. Professor Kumar, I'm sure you have things you'd want to add to what Rajiv.
Yeah. I like to add on. Before I say that, Kirk, I'm still getting some messages that people are asking requests to join. So please just permit them to join.
Yeah.
I'm getting on this thing. I think they've appeared in the meeting thing or something. They won't interrupt. They will just listen to it, but just let them join. Okay.
Yes.
Now
So,
I will. Okay. I messaged also. Now let me like to say 2-3 things here. One, as a preamble, I will say that a country whose history, whose heritage, whose culture, whose knowledge, whose science, whose people have been brutalized for last 1200 years. When this country today stands up in front of the world as a strong emerging power, economically, defense-wise, culture-wise, the same very forces who were party in brutalizing it become active Once again, hey, how come we ruled over them for so many years? How come they are standing on their feet today? We destroyed everything of theirs. We told them their culture was all mythology. How come the world has started following them today? We demolished yoga. Why is people following yoga today? How come this country, whose science we totally threw out, is reaching the Mars today? So it is this aspect, of India. They fully realize this thing well, that what India gave them 5,000 years back, when their civilizations were also not even born, the kind of concepts India gave, Sarvdhar Sambhava, let all religions flourish. Atiti Devo Bhave, a guest is like God. Or Vasudev Kutumbakam, the whole world is a family. These concepts coming out of India 5,000 years back. Second thing, remember about India, there were 4 religions which took birth on Indian soil: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. None of these religions went out of Indian boundaries with a sword to convert people. None of these religions went out of India with giving bribes to people to convert to those religions. And today, those who claim to be progressive liberals, who say that we respect every religion, I ask them this question, that if you respect every religion, then why do you go and convert the people of other religion? Look at your own selves before pointing a finger at India. Now today, besides what has happened in the past, I am not going into Macaulay education and other things and what the Indian community also did, because we, Indian community, did forget the people of Indian origin who were either in Fiji or in Mauritius or in other places over there. And even our first prime minister said, oh, I can't do anything. You belong to those nations, because none of them had gone with an Indian passport. They had only gone with the permits and all those things, and they could have been very well treated as Indian citizens right there and then, which were not done. And the other Indian mentality was running after the non-resident Indians, please, with due respect to them, that all those who had money, that's thing only, but never looked for those representatives of India who took Indian culture outside, who kept the Indian culture alive outside. That was the thing. But it is now being, the tables are being turned now. We have now the people of Indian origin status of OCI and all these things which are coming up. Gradually, these are taking up, and I hope they take action fast in this regard. Now, the question here in the modern context today is that why are in these many Western universities, there is an anti-India propaganda. There are active forces over there, whether you call them leftists or whether you call them jihadis or whether you call them so-called liberals and Democrats, because don't forget that China had been doing a lot to surround India culturally also. Not just in terms of army, not just in terms of economy. This biggest money lender of the world today, China being a communist country, is the biggest money lender in the world, usurping the countries, blackmailing the countries. They were culturally also encircling India. They were creating chairs everywhere. They were paying fellowships to people to write against India. They are paying to journalists to write against India. And same is the work being done by jihadis. We all know very well that how many chairs have been created by ISI in different Canadian universities, even in American universities. What is happening over there, we know that very well. We also know very well that what has happened in the Caribbean, you know this aspect very well, that hard fanatics went into the Caribbean regions. They split the Indian community into 2, Hindu and Muslim, and then the assault started. You know this very well, that in many Caribbean islands, every second, third month, there are attacks on temples. The murtis are destroyed, thefts take place, and the governments put it all under the carpet of law and order problem. That is not racial. And the whole thing which comes on caste, I am very much opposed to the use of this word caste. Casta means racial, a Portuguese word. How come this word casta is applied in the Indian context? Yeah. No one talks of Megasthenes, who talked of 7 Indian professions. We had communities in India. No one talks of those shlokas of Vedas, even in Manusmriti, which say that this is not by birth. This is not by birth. This is by karma. This is by what you do. This is how you said You explain the European society today. How will you analyze an American or European society today? You will say these are engineers, these are lawyers, these are doctors, these are farmers, these are laborers. Same was the Indian context. The divisions at that time. Okay, these were the people, intellectuals and all in the universities and all that. These were the warriors. They were called Kshatriyas, and they were interchangeable to a certain extent. And this rigidity started in India mainly after the 10th century, after the invasions which we saw. And please let me tell you, when you talk of the Dalit question, I asked this question once. When did scavenging start in India? Because toilet is not Indian culture. Even today, our Prime Minister says that build toilets. Scavenging came to India with the Turks. The Turks brought the commode to India and they converted people. And those people who refused to be converted, they were forced to do these jobs. How many of the world is aware of this thing that in Pakistan, when partition took place in 1947, when the Dalit Hindus wanted to come back to India from Pakistan, they were held there at gunpoint. If you go to India, who will do our scavenging work? These aspects no one will bring to light. They will only accuse India that India is becoming a Hindu state. In mob lynching is there. Tell me one aspect in terms of lynching aspects. And always say, nowhere in Hinduism and in Indian culture, any mob lynching is even mentioned. But there are religions in this world where mob lynching punishments are given as per their religious laws. Stone the persons for this offense. We in India never did that. It came as an Indian concept to India. It was introduced as an Indian concept to India, if that history is to be looked into in this whole aspect. And that is why these leftists today, when it comes to that, please understand one thing. For leftists, nationalism has no meaning. It is a bourgeois concept. So they have no national boundaries and all, nothing and all. So for them, anything, they use the democratic tools, they use to create anarchy. What is happening in America today? Was it just one custodial or that death which sparked the fall? There was no money behind it. There was no planning behind it, like the Delhi riots which we have in Delhi. All plotted in Delhi by the jihadis to destroy India, to destroy India's economy. Same thing being done over there. Because today's terrorism is not just a terrorism of the gun. It has become intellectual terrorism, academic terrorism, and now you have medical terrorism in the form of corona. You see, so many forms terrorism has taken. You have seen the doctor in Sri Lanka who used to operate those women who will come to him for treatment of other religions. All these cases are world over, but they will not be condemned. But India will be condemned. And why condemned? Because today India is standing on its feet. We have our heads up. Even of people of Indian origin today have pride in India. This is what has been happening in India in the last couple of years, the way India has emerged strong over there. And why no one talks, I tell you, in the West, that how in very first census in British India in 1861 and then in 1871, overnight, the Indian professional communities were converted into castes. The barbers, the carpenters, the ironsmiths, all these lohar, teli, all these aspects, they were never low castes. They were professional communities.
Okay,
overnight the party decided to put them as low castes, and they were put as low caste and accepted as low caste, further to divide India. No one talks of this aspect of casteism in India. Who declared martial races in India? Who created that caste division in India? No one talks of this aspect in India. Who created criminal castes?
Yeah.
Who created criminal tribes?
This is a very important point, and I want to bring Rajiv Ji back into the discussion and kind of move it a little to another topic that's dear to his heart, I know, because I think he's doing excellent work on it. Because you mentioned, Professor Kumar, that casta is a Portuguese word. It's not jati, it's not varna, and a part of the intellectual kshatriya work that Rajiv Ji has been doing for a long time is saying how these concepts, the concepts that we're using are inherently biased against India, and that the very words we use will lead us down the wrong path. Even for example, before I hand it over, I want to say, the term liberal and liberalism is a 19th century concept, right? John Stuart Mill and whatnot out of Europe. But India was liberal for millennia before. Whenever people would be fleeing, from the Dalai Lama today, or to the Zoroastrians who left Persia after the Muslim invasion, they went to India, because in India, all these groups were living side by side. India had this concept, was very liberal without the idea of liberalism. So I'd really like Rajiv ji to expand on this, because I know you've spoken about this quite a lot, and untranslatable words and these sorts of things.
So, Kurt, thank you. This is a very good lead-in. You mentioned the name John Stuart Mill. Now, I think people should be told, John Stuart Mill is considered the founding father of Western liberalism. He's considered, if you study history of liberalism in the 1800s, John Stuart Mill. His father, John, also a very famous person, wrote the first 2-3 volume history of India, a very pejorative, exceedingly hard-hitting against India. And this became required reading of the East India Company. For many decades, that was a standard normative text, so you know where things come from. That Mill's son, John Stuart Mill, at the age of around 18, joined the East India Company. Now, when they teach you how great he was as a liberal, they hide the fact that his entire life, till the end of the East India Company, where he gave the final address at the conclusion of the East India Company, when it was going to be when it was going to be dissolved in 1857, 1858, in that time frame. Since he was around 18 till his 50s at retirement age, he worked his entire life as an official of the East India Company. Now, when I go to Princeton University and sit in a class called liberalism, and then the moment they say John Stuart Mill, I raise my hand and say, do you know that he worked for the East India Company? His job was to read the Dharmashastras distorted on how to manage those people using their own vocabulary, and try to tell them that we are actually teaching them their history and their social science, but distorted in a way that it'll be clear that we are the rulers, we are civilizing them, and they need to be civilized. So this distortion of the Dharma Shastra, which actually started much earlier with John Stuart Mill, with the previous guys in the 90s, Jones started all this, but William Jones, but the John Stuart Mill is the guy who was real pada likha, intellectual scholar, taught in all the Ivy Leagues today. It is a very big scandal. I want you guys to help me bring it out. I've written so much.
I have to take this. I've been working with Alexander Dugin in Russia, and I've been talking about liberalism as the ideology of imperialism. And my paper tomorrow is about how the East India Company is, the tool of the first and most effective tool of globalism and liberalism. You just gave the best to put out. That is amazing. We need to further that, but I'm going to take and run with that.
I'll tell you, Kirk, you need to do a whole episode where we discuss liberalism, its origin, its history, its racist origins, and the role of the Mill father-son, and particularly John Stuart Mill. How could a man who is sitting in England running, part of the officials running the East India Company, be considered the founding father of liberalism in the West? Now, this is such a big deal. And I'm surprised. I have given 100 talks on this in India. I've given talks to the ministries. I've given talks to educated people. The point is, they should have turned it into a whole thesis, we should be organizing a whole conference on the fraud of liberalism.
Yes.
And I have done this work on many Western so-called liberals, their real background, their racist background, from Kant, Hegel onwards. The Germans, the British, the intellectuals, the founding fathers of Western thought, they are actually very guilty. You could look at what Hegel said about why colonialism is needed, why colonialism is good for India, how he promoted slavery. He talked about Africans, they have to be slaves. And he talked about the genocide of Native Americans because that's well deserved. So,
and Marx as well.
So, we should do a thesis, which is, we should do a whole session on the hypocrisy of liberalism, the hypocrisy of the left, and how they were created as sort of the guys who go out and hit based on a racist stuff. racist
That's
ideology.
that's actually our show next week, with Alexander Dugan. But I will invite you on to we'll do a series, but that's exactly what we're going to talk about next
So
week. Amazing.
the racist origins of Western liberalism and the use of what they turned into caste for their purposes. The person who's at the fulcrum, at the nexus of all this is John Stuart Mill.
Yes.
And you read the history of, in all the teachings about John Stuart Mill right here in Princeton University, he's a big shot. It talks about his thoughts and his ideas, very sanitized, never about his personal life and his career. It was not a part-time job in the East India Company. His part-time job was to write scholarship about liberalism. His full-time job was as an officer of the East India Company. This is so big.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have to bring this up. Now, the facts about Varna and Jati are that Varna is not by birth. Varna is your tendency, your aptitude. Do you have an intellectual aptitude? Do you have a fighting aptitude? Are you the guy who's a corporate money type of guy? Are you hands-on, work with your hands, like artisans work with their hands, like surgeons, people where they have minute attention to detail, art, all kinds of people who work with their hands. So that is the Varna attribute, and that is not by birth. In fact, Krishna talks very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita that your Varna is based on your guna, and guna means your quality, and that guna comes out of your karma. So, you've done certain karma, gives you a certain type of tendencies, and that is your guna. Jati is lineage. Jati is what you inherit by birth. So I am, to some extent, it's like nature versus nurture. My DNA is my structure from birth, but that doesn't mean that exhausts who I am. There is something called epigenetics. There is genetics and epigenetics. Most of the genetic material is not in your DNA, but outside the DNA. It is a soil that turns on or turns off various genes. Your genes can be turned on, genes can be turned off, some genes can be highlighted. And this is done by the epigenetics, and the epigenetics is behavior. It is my behavior, my mindset. If I do meditation, my epigenetics changes. If I do certain type of work, certain propensity, if my epigenetics changes. So while my genes are inherited, my epigenetics is my behavior. So, and that is what gives the manifestation, which genes manifest, which genes express themselves, and which genes don't. So it is partly my hardware is in fact inherited. Western science will admit that. But large part of who I am, my character, is actually my own doing. So this idea of Varna was always separate from Jati. And then at some point in time, Lord Risley, who was himself a racist, he was entrusted with starting the census of India. And in the first census, he creates this hierarchy he writes the hierarchy of caste, gives them names based on his understanding as a social scientist, as an anthropologist looking at different people. And he requires people to fill out this form based on defining their caste. And he writes in the notes to the first census of India that I'm having difficulty convincing many of the people to select a caste because they don't think they belong into this structure.
Right.
He writes that people don't want to belong to this structure. So it's not as if the caste system existed. The people don't like it. It's like, if somebody does a survey of your census and they come up with categories, you don't like those categories, you don't belong in those categories, you will resist. But he says, but I'm persuading people and convincing them and coercing them to pick a caste. So the caste system was formed in that way. Every 10 years, in the late 1800s, they would do this survey for the census, and they would require the leader of each community to pick a caste for all his people. It was not a census where every person was asked. They would ask a few leaders, and they would put all those people into that. So this whole thing is a fraud, and I'm very glad that you're mentioning it. And you see, people sometimes ask me, why are you criticizing academics? We are worrying about popular stuff. And I tell them that the Aryan invasion theory started as an academic theory, and you're living with it. The caste system that the Europeans fabricated is an academic construction, and you are living with it. So politics is influenced by these kind of academic misdeeds, academic mischief, and we have to go to the very roots and attack them there.
Absolutely. Now, Professor Kumar, I want to bring in another aspect into the discussion, which is important because you mentioned the global coordination of all these disruptions and rioting and anarchy that's happening all over the world. Very interestingly, William Dalrymple's latest book on the East India Company is called The Anarchy. It was published last year, and I'm supposed to be speaking to him soon. But your insight is very important, because you started out as a communist and then you moved to nationalism. So that's very interesting. Because you mentioned the role of the Chinese as well, and the irony of the communists being the biggest money lenders. But it's also Marx too comes from that line. So, I'd like you to maybe just outline for our listeners this journey from communism to nationalism, because there's some very, very interesting points along that journey from our previous.
Well, Kirk, let me tell you, I think when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was asked a question. On 14th November, they make a child, as the Nehru thing. It's a Children's Day. And I was asked my question by Mr. V.V. Giri, who is the chief guest, later on Vice President of India. What is your name? And I said, Rajan Saxena Malhotra. And he said, what does this mean? I said, my father is Saxena. My mother is Malhotra. So I am Rajan Saxena Malhotra. And he gave me 10 rupees at that. I had never compromised with my nationalism. I have seen as a kid the wars of 62, the 65 war, the 71 war. Now what happened is that during the emergency, everything got split. And I came in touch with some leaders who were in Meerut from the Communist Party, hiding over there underground. And we came in touch. And I became a part of their teachers' activism and all that. 21 years almost I was there with them. But let me tell you, I never compromised on the national issue. And among the historians in the left, I was always daggers drawn with Professor Irfan Habib and Professor Bipin Chandra. And you won't believe that in 1983, when I was a party member, Irfan Habib had snatched the mic from my face, because I spoke about the nation at that time. And I resigned also from the party on the issue of nationalism itself in 96.
I just want to intervene here for people that don't know the intellectual history of communism. One of the big things about communism.
I'm coming to that.
Against nationalism.
Yeah,
I'm coming nations.
to that. And what I'm saying is my analysis is not just for India, but a global analysis.
Yeah.
You see, when the Russian Revolution took place and the communists came in power in Russia, news was not coming out. The only news which was being fed to the world that an oppressive system has been done away with and there is prosperity and peace and harmony for the poor people and workers have got in heaven now and everything and the powers in their hand, and this is what was coming out. So the youth in the colonies and other places got affected by this ideology, thinking that, this colonialism is exploiting us and Russia has had a successful revolution. So we must also follow this ideology to bring about our own emancipation without knowing this aspect, that what that ideology was doing within the country. No one knew till late that how many peasants were murdered by Stalin or how many people were murdered by Mao. And no one knew that for communists, human life means nothing to them. And even if you look at now also, you see in China, my first differences in the party came over Tiananmen Square. And again in China, what you see now, the worst exploited labor force in the world is in China. Low wages and everything. Everyone knows that. What liberties? Tell me a single country, communist country world over, which has given any liberty to its citizens. Whether they can speak, you see people in India who shout in India here today that there is no democracy in India and there is fascism in India and all. Can they even utter a word like this if they are in Pakistan, or if they are in China, or if they are in Cuba, or if they are in other countries. All these liberties, all these aspects which they have over there, they do it like that. So in this context, coming out of it and realizing that a hypocrisy, you say workers of the world unite, and you sit in AC rooms, have your parties, have your everything, and you talk of the workers, and the real leadership which is coming from the workers, they don't have a place in the hierarchy. So when I once saw all these things, you see, the day I resigned, that was the day when Jyoti Basu was offered Prime Ministership of India in 96. And we wanted him to take that thing. And I was interviewed that day on BBC, CNN, Indian National News Channel and all. And I gave 4 arguments. I said he has nothing to lose. Internationally, the left is declining, so it will be a good thing. And then he should look at India from an all India perspective. India is a large country. They should not look at India from the perspective of Bengal or Kerala only. And then fourthly, I questioned, what is this Marxism I can't understand? Either you don't participate in a bourgeois democracy, and if you participate in a bourgeois democracy, you will say, we will take responsibility in a state of Bengal, but we won't take the responsibility at a national level. So that is hypocrisy. And that is why I sort of moved out of this kind of a thing. And nationalism, I had never compromised. And let me tell you today, I am a staunch nationalist. I'm not for any party and all, but I'm for my leadership, because I see in my present Prime Minister a person who has restored India's national pride, who is giving India a leadership which is coming from the people, with the people's point of view. So I'm a nationalist, and I'm very proud of my religion. I was never a practicing, ritualistic Hindu in that sense, but I can't tolerate if someone casts any aspersions on my religion. And the caste thing you said, you see how it got distorted. I'll give you an example from Trinidad itself. You know, in Trinidad, there is a saying, all these Maharaj in Trinidad, they are Maharaj by ship, not by birth.
Yeah.
Not by birth, by ship.
Brahmin by boat and not by birth.
Yeah. So I challenged Prince Samru in the seminar in UV itself. I said, Mr. Samru, go out and see the panel which your Trinidad archives has put over there. And they have given in that a caste-wise kind of a figure, that in that which is there, that this caste of 200 people were there on the ship, this was 30 on the ship, these were 80 on the ship, and you find Brahmins also there. I don't believe in casteism. Mm-hmm. But this kind of distortions which they use, and you please see, don't forget one other aspect, one very important aspect in relation to the plantation colonies, that the colonial powers, what they could not do in colonies, particularly India, they created that in plantation colonies. They created a society according to their own whims and fancies. Your marriages won't be allowed. You know that in Trinidad till 1940s, Hindu marriages were not recognized.
Yes, my mother's birth certificate has her as illegitimate because she was married, because her parents were married under
and that has its repercussions. Yeah. Okay, so the money can't be transferred, property can't. Then, cremation was not allowed.
Yep.
And if these things had been written, what they call these sophisticated agreements, these were indentured labor brought through agreement. Mm-hmm. If this thing would have been written in agreements, would any Indian would have left the shores? Mm-hmm. And then they talk of Indians left because of poverty and casteism and all those aspects. My question, I have published that out. Indians left from there after 100 years of British rule.
Yes.
So you can't take away the responsibility of the British in creating famines in India, in creating unemployment in India, in creating all these natural disasters in India, not managing them. That's why people were leaving. You forced them. This was forced migration. This was not a migration which people try to say it is mobility studies and migration studies and all that. And you see these very people who are casting aspersions on India today. Please tell me one thing, this thing. We know the Jallianwala massacre. Dyers. Today only I tweeted that Mountbatten is much more responsible than a much bigger massacre of Indians in 1947 than the Jallianwala massacre when India was partitioned. Churchill was responsible for a bigger massacre in 1943. And they tell us these things. Please, you know about the remittances. The money which the Indians used to send back home with their labor from these Caribbean islands. Millions of pounds still lying in the Bank of England. Did they ever try to return it even to those plantation colonies or the Indian community over there? Which money was never sent back to India, and it was not distributed in India because in 1857 villages after villages were destroyed, burned by these so-called civilized people of the world. So many things which are there, and today when we are speaking it out, when we are bringing out the real history of India, then these people have pains. Oh, how come this Indian historian is challenging us? How come he's doing that? And I'll add to Mr. Rajiv Malhotra, what he has said is that all information which Karl Marx had about India was from these colonial administrators.
Absolutely.
And that was Marx based in observation, saying that Indians worship cow and Indian worship monkey, and India has been always invaded and all these things, and the Asiatic mode of production and all these things. Tell me one thing. Before the British came to India and ruled over India, what was India's economy?
Exactly.
We traded with the world, but we never used our trade to colonize the world.
Right now, we're coming closer to the end. Now, there's one issue I know we risk going over, but I think it's important because the world right now, it seems it's moving in a kind of Cold War. The US, Russia, China, and India seems to be moving, I suppose, more on the American side. That's what it seems like. But in my view, I've been critical of this because I think the West has undermined India so much, and this move towards the West is, I don't think it's properly thought through. But I'd like to hear your opinions on this, because this is really the way, global geopolitics and so many other things are going to be affected by this. Rajiv ji, you're in the United States, so that I'd really be interested in your perspective there, as well as Professor Kumar in India itself. So Rajiv ji.
It's a very timely question. I think that India is too large to sort of become a pet of either left wing, right wing, China, Russia, US. It has to have its own, selfhood. You cannot put up an elephant for adoption. You cannot say, it's too big, it's too great, it's grand. It has to have its own. So this is a sort of sign of weakness of India, that we cannot deal with our geopolitics, we cannot deal with our challenges ourselves. So we go suck up to this guy and do this jula with one guy and hug with the other guy and see who will reciprocate and this sort of thing. I'll tell you one thing. When President Xi came to India, which was his first trip overseas when he got appointed, and he had this jula with Modi in Modi's home place, and then Modi was very upset that this guy betrayed and all that. Now you have to understand that the Chinese are not into soft power; they're into hard power. And China, and we try to sell them on soft power, old civilization, yoga, Buddhism, culture. They pat our back and told us what we like to hear. But they are really into hard power. So his algorithm and his modus operandi is all about Chinese hard power, how to expand and whatnot. He wanted to see if India would offer some kind of a hard power deal, which would allow the two countries to unite and offset the West. And India was into selling soft power. And he actually, before they built this Belt and Road initiative through Pakistan to get access to the Indian Ocean, they actually wanted direct roads into India to build trade and reach the Indian market, and then access through the Indian market the Indian Ocean. And India was very scared, didn't want to do it. So we've had a kind of desire to kind of duck our head in sand. Yeah. Even Nepal was available while it was a Hindu kingdom. Before the kings were gotten rid of by the Maoists, there was a slight window of opportunity when they could have actually turned it over to India like Sikkim. They could have said, rather than being out of business, we'd rather be with a fellow Hindu country. It was our weakness during, I guess, Indira Gandhi's time or whenever, or later on Manmohan Singh's time. It was our weakness that why we don't want to take on responsibility. We want to be apathetic, and unless there is a knock at the door with a gun who's pointing at me, I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to take. Why should I get involved? When the Bangladesh was created, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman owed everything to India because we actually created a country for him and gave him the keys. We had this 1971 war to create Bangladesh. He actually asked, what do you want? And Indira Gandhi, and there was a discussion where Manekshaw, who was the general of the Indian army who won all this, Manekshaw says that Indira Gandhi says, I don't want to take over one more state because it'll become another state. I agree. We needn't have taken over Bangladesh and made it part of India, which was the offer. But northern part of Bangladesh is where there is this chicken's neck or this goose neck, which is a very tiny sliver of land, 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers, where if that were compromised, then all of the Northeast is gone. So we could have done a trade of real estate, a territorial trade. We will take over that and make it wider, make it from instead of 20, make it 50, 80, 100 kilometers, and we'll give you equivalent land somewhere else to even it out. They would have loved it. There was no problem. But we didn't have that insight. Yeah. Also, when you look at the Bay of Bengal, from the ocean, there is no direct access to the northeast of India because Myanmar and Bangladesh come in the way. A small amount of access, a small piece of land to give us access from the Navy into the northeast would have secured that territory. We didn't think of it that way.
Yes.
When Pakistan was at our feet because we'd taken over the whole Pakistani army, captured them in Bangladesh, instead of just returning it to them for nothing, we should have enforced a Kashmir solution permanently. Yes. Permanently saying, okay, we are going to accept your surrender. Part of the terms of surrender is this is the border and no more nonsense. You see, we just didn't think ahead of the immediate moment. We just didn't think strategically. So I would say a large part of our problem is lack of strategic thinking. And so similarly here in the US elections, we're saying, will this guy hug us more or will that guy hug us more? Now, Kamala Harris, because she's got partly Indian ethnicity, even though she's against India on all kind of policies. So, let's go after her. So I think the wrong reasons, whether it is supporting Trump for certain reasons, whether it's supporting, the Biden, Kamala Harris ticket for certain reasons, these are the wrong reasons. India should have its own strength, its own hard power. You see, soft power is useless unless you have hard power. Yeah. Nobody will take your soft power seriously, and if you're a weak person begging.
That's
when
right.
You are strong in terms of your finance, your self-esteem, and your ability to exert power, then people will also accept your culture as soft power and give you credit for it. So I'm in this whole field of giving India credit for its soft power, documenting how it was taken and digested and U-turned and all that. And the point is, while all that is fine and dandy, unless you are yourself very confident, others are not going to give you credit. So India approaches the American political scene out of weakness, and that is no good.
Oh, that's a brilliant analysis. I'm totally supportive of that. I would love for us to continue this in future discussions. Professor Kumar, India and the new geopolitics and this emerging Cold War, what's your view?
Yeah, I'll tell you two things. One is that this is first time India has proved to the world that if they talk of the Gandhi's Charkha and Gandhi's non-violence, India also has a Sudarshan Chakra of God Krishna to fight it out. First time the Chinese have been rebutted. And I tell you, India will neither go with America nor with China, this kind of a thing. Today, India is in a position, and I have said this is going to happen very soon, that all the countries which border China and who are being harassed by China, whether it is South Asia, South China Sea, whether it which I call the Champa Sea, or whether it is countries' land borders right from Mongolia to these places and all. In very near future, you are going to find a consortium of all these countries challenging China and stopping all again. let me tell you one very interesting thing here, because the Western views must know this. China talks a lot of maps and brings out this map and that map. I want to take China back to the map of Qing dynasty and Ming dynasty, by their maps only. When the Chinese wall was made, the Chinese wall was made to protect the Chinese inland, and that was China's inland. And outside the Chinese wall, whatever China has now has been usurped from other nations. And a time is coming now when China will be forced back into its hinterland, the Chinese land itself. Because now, with the kind of stand which India has taken, and mind it, India has not taken it only in Ladakh. India is taking it in India Ocean. India is going in exercises now in Indian Ocean, in South China Sea also. India is moving with the American Navy and all that. And this is giving a confidence. Even yesterday only, Nepal has stood down now, which had started playing the China game. Because Nepal also go the Pakistan way. Today, Pakistan is mortgaged to China, the whole of Pakistan. And you see the other aspect related to China, which I wanted to bring to the Western world, because the Western people don't think of those aspects. That Pakistan today, who claims and talks of Muslim, and word over these jihadis and these liberals and communists are shouting that Muslims are being persecuted in India. Do they ever raise a single word about the Ulgars? What China is doing to the Muslims there? Yesterday only the news was there that the Chinese have converted a mosque into toilets. On that, Pakistan will not comment, which will comment. And I want to tell you one thing, that the amount of liberty and the amount of facilities which the minorities have in India, show me a single country in the world where they have these facilities. And still, they have the liberty to attack India and to attack the Indian government. Show me one country. And I want to say one more thing on Indian
Sure, yeah. You have to bring it to a close.
Okay. The democracy in India survives not because by shouting of these people, democracy, democracy. Democracy of India survives because the Indian soldier stands at 18,000 feet in the mountains or in Rann of Kutch or in the jungles to protect India's constitution, India's liberties, and India's rights, what we have with this today. And it is high time that this misconceptions and this propaganda which is being carried out in the West, who claim themselves to be highly educated and all, how can they pass judgment just based on BBC's biased reports? Why don't they talk to people in India? Why do they go by this leftist or jihadi propaganda only? And that is where I say that the Indian government now must take into account the people of Indian origin much more into confidence, much more interact with them, give them much more, facilitate much more them, and have an international forum at a very strong level in these ties.
Absolutely. You know, I could talk to you all for the whole afternoon, the whole day, and I'm sure we still wouldn't finish.
It happens.
Amazing discussion. And I know, so, you know, and you all are very active. I want to make sure the audience knows where to find your work. Rajiv ji, it's infinityfoundation.com is the best place.
That is the website, infinityfoundation.com. My YouTube is rajivmalhotra.official. That is the YouTube channel. And then the Facebook is also rajivmalhotra.official. That is the Facebook channel. And my Twitter is @RajivMessage. Those are my main coordinates.
Excellent. And Professor Kumar, where can people find
Well,
out?
my YouTube is there, same in the name of Prof. Kapil Kumar. And so is my Twitter thing at Prof. Kapil Kumar, one word, K in both are capital. And I don't have a Facebook account now. I closed it out. And but soon I'm coming with a website of my own, and a Sushri website also will be there. This research thing which we are going to bring for unearthing the suppressed realities of Indian history, that also will be on the websites very soon over there.
Excellent, excellent. And then you're always on NDTV and always arguing on Indian TV with
No, I don't go to NDTV at all. I call it a Barbadi channel.
Okay.
I don't go to. I don't go to these Barbadiwalas and paid journalists, you know. I don't go to them.
Well, thanks so much for this enlightening and stimulating.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much. Pleasure being with you. And Rajiv ji, namaskar. It's a real pleasure. I remember 2015 when we were together in the diaspora conference on Indian heritage, past, present, and future in Delhi, which you were kind enough to come, and I had invited you at that time, organizing that under Sushma ji's time at that time. I remember that very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Wonderful.
again very much.
Wonderful, everybody. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's been a pleasure
Bye-bye.
having both of you on the program. Well, that's it for this week's episode of A Story Club Global Cultures. We were talking with our guests Rajiv Malhotra and Professor Kapil Kumar on the topic of understanding and misunderstanding India, religion, politics, and society. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, like, share, and tell your friends about us. Thanks again, and see you next week.